Ouroboros is a Greek word meaning tail devourer. It is one of the oldest mystical symbols in the world. It can be perceived as enveloping itself, where the past, as the tail, appears to disappear but really moves into an inner domain or reality, vanishing from view but still existing. The Ouroboros has several meanings interwoven into it. Foremost is the symbolism of the serpent biting, devouring, or eating its own tail. This symbolizes the cyclic nature of the universe, creation out of destruction, life out of death. The Ouroboros eats its own tail to sustain its life in an eternal cycle of renewal. It is sometimes depicted in the shape of a figure 8 as well. The serpent biting its own tail is first seen as early as 1600 years BC in Egypt as a symbol of the sun and represented the travels of the sun disk. From there it moved to the Phoenicians and then to the Greeks, who gave it its name, Ouroboros, which means devouring its tail. In mythology, the Ouroboros is a symbol representing the Milky Way galaxy. Myth refers to a serpent of light residing in the heavens. The Milky Way is this serpent. Many ancients used the galaxy to calculate cosmic and earth cycles. It is found in Gnosticism and alchemy, representing the cyclical nature of life and the fusion of opposites. It also symbolizes the transcendence of duality and was related to the solar god Abraxas and signified eternity and the soul of the world. In alchemy, it represents the spirit of Mercury, the substance that permeates all matter, and symbolizes continuous renewal, the cycle of life and death, and harmony of opposites. As a symbol of eternal unity of all things, the cycle of birth and death from which the alchemist sought release and liberation, it unites opposites, the conscious and the unconscious mind. In alchemy, the Ouroboros is also used as a purifying glyph. In an alchemical textbook, Christophia, which is gold making, of Cleopatra, contains a drawing of the Ouroboros representing the serpent as half light, half dark, echoing symbols such as the yin and yang, which illustrates the dual nature of all things, but more importantly, that these opposites are not in conflict. The book is mainly centered around the idea of one is all, a concept that is related to Hermetic wisdom. The Ouroboros symbolizes duality, and we know where duality derived from, and we will read this in Genesis, where from partaking of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is where duality entered into men, and sin and death entered into the world. Through the Ouroboros, we see the representation of life through death is also represented by the phoenix rising from its ashes. We can attribute this to the Nephilim and the fallen angels. The fallen angels which were chained in darkness below, and the Nephilim, which disembodied spirits roam the earth in dry places, as the Bible tells us. These entities want nothing more than to be rebirthed back onto the physical plane. Hence, the symbol of the Ouroboros symbolizes their nature and their wanting to be rebirthed onto this plane. Also, as we gaze up into the heaven, we may find the Ouroboros symbolized by the Milky Way galaxy belt above us. From what we understand and know now through the Hebrew cosmology, it is not a galaxy, but a belt of stars that is gathered together. Let us investigate and propose a theory of what this belt of stars may be and what the Bible may be pointing out to us. Let us read from Revelation chapter 12. This chapter is very interesting in that it is speaking of past, present, and future events. Let us start with reading from verse 4. And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to earth, And the dragon stood before the woman, which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born. And she brought forth a man-child, who was to rule all nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up unto God, to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And there was a war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent, called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, Now is come salvation and strength in the kingdom of our God and the power of his Christ, for the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our God day and night. And they overcame him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, and they loved not their lives unto death. What's interesting about what we read in Revelation 12 is the man-child that was brought forth was Jesus Christ. Satan's plan was basically defeated upon Calvary when Jesus died on the cross and conquered death. What is interesting to note in here is that some of these events have not fully happened yet. The war in heaven is continual and is still going on and being waged today. Satan and the rebel angels were cast out of the third high heaven and into the earth. Now, through understanding the proper Hebrew cosmology, we can see exactly how this happened. We know that God's kingdom resides atop the earth, atop of the firmament, as we can read in Psalms chapter 104. Bless the Lord, O my soul, O Lord my God, thou art very great. Thou art clothed with honor and majesty, who coverest thyself with light as with a garment, who stretchest out the heavens like a curtain, who layeth the beams of his chambers in the waters, who maketh the clouds his chariot, who walketh upon the wings of the wind, who maketh his angels spirits, his ministers a flaming fire, who laid the foundations of the earth that it should not be removed forever. If we go back to Revelations 12:9, we read that Satan and his angels were cast out into the earth, being cast out from heaven, a realm that we cannot comprehend nor have much knowledge of except through what we read in the scriptures. But from what we can read, we can understand that to be cast out into the earth is essentially being barred from leaving the firmament and being barred from entering into God's realm. If we look at Polaris, which is located directly at the center of Earth, it would be right below the top of the firmament dome, directly in the center under God's throne. We know that Satan once had access to high heaven, and that Satan traveled about on earth, as we can read in Job chapter 2, verses 1 and 2. Again there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them to present himself before the Lord. And the Lord said unto Satan, From whence comest thou? And Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro and in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. When Satan drew 1/3 of the angels with his tail, would it not seem likely that this belt of stars that we call the dark rift in the Milky Way just may be the location of these rebel angels? A belt of stars that just happens to form what looks like a serpent eating its tail. Does the dark rift not seem like a formation of a type of blockade in the heavens above? The word star in Hebrew is kokav. When we look at the stars, most of them appear to be round and somewhat iridescent. Each and every star is different and was created in its own glory when God made them and named them all. By understanding what the stars are, we can see the meaning of stars in all the prophecies throughout the scriptures. Earlier, we had mentioned Abraxas. Now let us explore the meaning of what or who Abraxas may be. Abraxas was a word of mystic meaning in the system of the Gnostic Balassides, being there applied to the great archon, the precepts of the 365 spheres. The word is found in Gnostic texts, such as the Holy Book of the Great Invisible Spirit, and also appears in the Greek magical papyri. It was engraved on certain antique gemstones, called on that account Abraxas stones, which were used as amulets or charms. This is what it looks like when written in Greek. If we go to Thayer's definition, it means the vaulted expanse of the sky with all things visible in it, the universe, the world, the aerial heavens or sky, the region where the clouds and the tempests gather, where thunder and lightning are produced. What is very interesting to note is that the title precepts of the 365 spheres, precept is a Latin word meaning first in time or order, the first, foremost, chief, the most eminent, distinguished or noble, the first man, first person. As we view the heaven above and realize most of the stars are spheres, as the Hebrew word indicates, we are starting to see an interesting connection. Just who is the prince of the power of the air? We find this in the scriptures. We can read about the fall of Lucifer, or in the proper translation, the term meaning light bearer, which was Satan's title before iniquity was found in him. We see that Lucifer was the covering cherub, the great archon, once the leader or chief of the angels. Now let us read in Ezekiel 28:14. Thou art the anointed cherub that covereth, and I have set thee so. Thou wast upon the holy mountain of God. Thou hast walked up and down in the midst of the stones of fire. It is sure an interesting connection to what the Bible outlines and to what Abraxas means concerning the Abraxas stones and the reference to being the chief of the spheres. The 7 letters spelling the name Abraxas may represent each of the 7 planets, or as the Bible terms them, the wandering stars. Before we move forward, let it be known that all Gnostic texts are a corruption and twisting of the true biblical accounts and truths. The writers of such texts and teachers of these texts are merely keeping the tradition of the mystery school's sacred knowledge and preserving the works of the fallen angels. Be extremely cautious of those whom teach from these Gnostic texts and those that attempt to claim that they are truth, as they are a skewed mirror of the biblical accounts. They compile the forbidden knowledge that derived straight from the fallen angels in the days of Noah. The Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung wrote a short Gnostic treatise in 1916 called The 7 Sermons to the Dead, which called Abraxas the supreme power of being transcending both God and the devil, and unites all opposites into one being. The Holy Book, or Unholy Book, of the Great Invisible Spirit, for instance, refers to Abraxas as an aeon dwelling with Sophia and other aeons of the Palorma Ducaius. In the light of the luminary Eleth, in several texts the luminary Eleth is the last of the luminaries or spiritual lights that come forward, and it is the aeon Sophia associated with Eleth who encounters darkness and becomes involved in the chain of events that leads to the demiurge rule of the world and the savage effort that ensues. Abraxas is also where we derive the term abracadabra.